Welcome all to High Strangeness in Alaska, the Bigfoot studies. Really excited about this series. This is the 10th weekly episode I've done in a row. I'm doing an episode every Sunday focusing mainly on Bigfoot, but also on some Alaska themed paranormal studies. But I do want to say that I walked into a gold mine when it comes to Bigfoot information, mainly because my buddy at work, Patrick, he's this old timer. He just started talking about Bigfoot and a sighting he had, and I was just like speechless. I started asking him questions. He gave me all this information. He gave me a new resource. But the thing is, I couldn't interview him because the stories he has are from a small Alaskan community. He married a woman that's part of that community, and she doesn't want that kind of tension from the other tribal members. So it was all right to try to kind of get this information from him, but he didn't want to be on camera. Now, the large place I'm talking about is the YK Delta, which is a huge area. It's bigger than most states. So this is the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. It's this giant, massive land mass of river deltas and marshy land, forests, but not many big trees. But anyways, it's bigger than most states. And the hub of that area, it's not really a village. It's called a village hub, even though it's very remote, is Bethel. So all these little villages are a plane hop on a float plane from Bethel, and it's all over this area. I'll show it on the map. It's interesting because I was kind of wrong about this area when I talked about Bigfoot in general and the different kinds of Bigfoot all over Alaska, because I had said, in my experience, the Bigfoot of the YK Delta, or Western Alaska, we'll call it, have some kind of like supernatural element, because the two people I interviewed said that they saw Bigfoot, like in their dreams, and always had glowing red eyes. I was kind of right, because there is some high strangeness and weirdness to these, but there's also by far and far across the board, it seems like this is a flesh and blood creature that lives here. And the stories we heard, that I heard from this guy, were incredible. Now, before I get into the resource, he told me I'm going to talk about Patrick's sighting and just some of the information he told me about Bigfoot. He lived in that area over 20 years with his wife, and that was not in Bethel. It was in one of the smaller villages surrounding Bethel. And when we say surrounding, it could be hundreds of miles from Bethel, because it's a huge, massive area. Now, he lived in one of those areas, and I am taking down stuff in this journal, which is a huge resource. It's one of the things I learned from Alex Petikoff, Small Town Monsters, when I was tagging along with him, is that you do your investigations and keep a journal. And this is turning out to be a treasure trove for me, because I'm writing down all these accounts and interviews and stuff in this journal. So I did draw a picture of Patrick. I'll show that. But so he just started talking about Hairy Man, the Hairy Man of the YK Delta, and he discussed his sighting. Now, his sighting is something that is common. We see in bush plane pilots and passengers. Of course, you cannot drive to Bethel. You have to take an airplane to get to Bethel. I mean, there's all those rivers. They have not built a river with a bunch of bridges to drive to Bethel, and of course not any of the surrounding small villages. So he was in an airplane. They were just kind of taking off, and he saw a large creature in the water. And this is what's interesting. He has a theory, because of all these sightings he heard about. He believes that the creatures live in the water, which I have so many questions about. Like, are you saying they're amphibious? Can they breathe underwater? Do they float around or swim? Do they have rafts? I need to talk to him some more about that, but he says that they live in the water. Anyways, he said that there was a brown, hairy creature, and he was looking down at it. He started looking at, what is that? It's not a moose. It's not a bear. At first, he said he thought it was an alligator because it had like this pointed shape to it. But then as he started looking at it and he thought about it later, he believes he saw a hairy man. It was a big thing, brown hairy thing in the water that was not a moose, not a beaver, not a muskrat, not a bear. He believes it was a hairy man. And the reason he believes so is because there are so many hairy man stories in the western YK Delta. I knew that there was a lot. I did not know how much there were. He started telling me about conspiracies, aggressive Bigfoot. He said that they beat on cabins. They personally knew somebody. There was a sighting where hairy man was outside the cabin beating on the walls. How terrifying would that be? It's aggressive. We'll talk about the meat eating aspect of it. He said that one of the sightings, it ripped a dog in half. So that is not a benign, peaceful creature. It ripped a dog in half. And then he said there was also the kind of this hush hush about it. He said, you know, he would ask people, well, why don't you do a big media report? Why don't you report this to the officials, the government, the police? And what he was told is, oh, they want to keep it on the wraps. They don't want to hear about it. We're not going to report it because, you know, they don't want us to talk about it. And so I started thinking about the resource he gave me and some of the stories in that. We'll get into that. So buckle up, we're going for a ride. Then he tells me, well, check out the Delta Discovery. There's a paper over there. They sometimes do a weekly story of it, and they got little drawings. I was like, what? What's the Delta Discovery? It turns out the Delta Discovery is a local media print newspaper. They have print, and I looked a few of the articles up online. It's in that YK Delta Bethel area, surrounding area, and they believe, wonderful journalists, they believe in Bigfoot, and there are some crazy stories. I'm going to use this as a big resource. Check it out for yourselves. Google Delta Discovery, or just look up their website, deltadiscovery.com. It's a little mom and pop operation newspaper, and I think they are wonderful because they believe in the hairy man, as the Sasquatch is called in that area. And I've taken some notes in my journal of one of the articles. This is kind of quoted. A lot of this is quoted from the Delta Discovery. So they talking about Sasquatch, they say it's always hairy, either black, brown, auburn, or white hair, which is interesting because, of course, when I was talking to Rob Roy Menzies, he mentioned, you know, sometimes they're the different blonde color, the white hair. It almost has no neck. This is interesting. So it's difficult to turn. It can't turn like a human. It's got to turn its whole torso. My uncle is like that. He's got a fused neck. He's got to turn the whole torso in order to look, which makes sense for some of the sightings, the Robertson Pattinson film. And this is interesting. It's always natural occurrences, not supernatural. I disagree with that a little bit because there is maybe 5% of the stories from this area are supernatural. But it's good to know that I was wrong, that mainly in this area, it is a natural flesh and blood creature. They say looks like a cross between a man and a gorilla. Stories from Chivak to Kotlik. These are some of the small villages around that Bethel hub area I was talking about. And from Kotlik to Pilot Station. Now, when you're talking Pilot Station, that's way up north. That's getting into the interior. And as the further north and west you go, you get into Athabascan territory, and they've got their own big hairy man stories. A little different than from these. It's kind of steeped in the culture, but many, many hairy man stories when you get farther down the Yukon River, towards the east, actually. Sightings are also along the Kuskokwim River from McGrath area to Bethel and up the Johnson River. But the greatest number of sightings, this is interesting, are between the mouth of the Yukon River to Pilot Station and around Tuluksak, a village that is sort of situated all by itself between Akiak and Kalskag. I've heard of a lot of these villages. And you got to realize some of these villages have maybe 60 people in them. That's how small they are. These are the places where it's over $10 for a gallon of gasoline and over $10 for a gallon of milk. Just very expensive to live in these places. Everything's flown in. It's very, very remote. Going on, people report seeing the creature in wide open spaces and in forested areas. So there are some areas when you get closer to the river and a little farther, north, I guess, where there are some kind of spruce-like trees, a lot of tall willows, but you did get some forested areas, which is interesting. Others see it trying to hide from people or fleeing the witnesses. Some witnesses flee the creature instead. Most of the time they are harmless Bigfoot, but in one instance it appears hostile and charges a hunter who fires at the monster and misses. And this is all kind of quoted from the Delta Discovery. Another points a gun at the creature but does not fire his weapon. In another story, a man kills a hairy man and flees, only to have other Bigfoot harass the killer in the village at night until he leaves the village for good. Not good. I mean, it's good he left, but I mean, that's not good. They're harassing him. Another sees the hairy man hunting another animal. That is significant to me because I believe they are meat eaters. We've heard reports in the Pacific Northwest and in Alaska of Bigfoot eating deer, killing bears, smaller, medium-sized to even big game, eating meat. And when you think about that, there's enough food for a community of Bigfoot just to live forever because of all the animals up here. They can easily survive, sustain themselves because they are meat eaters, and that is also scary. Others see it while flying in an airplane. Patrick saw one in an airplane, and looks like a cross between a man and a gorilla. Now, this is where it starts. They say flesh and blood, but this is where the story starts to get creepy. The legend of Gabriel Fox. There's not much of this, and I think Patrick knows about this. There's just some mentions of it in the Tundra, this resource I'm talking about. So Gabriel Fox, the story of a young boy who ran away from the children's home near Kwethluk. That's a village in the YK Delta. This is in the 1960s or 70s. He survived in the wilderness by turning into a hairy man and was taken away by the military and hidden, and they covered it up. And I think that is why there's some of the paranoia about government and military in these villages. There's also, there used to be a lot more military presence in the 60s. After World War II, they had all these bases, and the National Guard shut like 70% of them down. I've seen the remnants of them. I mean, there's a couple still in operation, and they have, skeleton crew staff there. But there are some abandoned buildings because there used to be a huge Army presence, and the National Guard started shutting them down in the 70s and 80s. So there was a big military presence there. Even in the YK Delta, there was a military presence. And the story is Gabriel Fox turned into a hairy man. Now, what does that mean? He didn't just grow facial hair and become a wild man. He transformed into a hairy man. Now, in the Yupik culture, this is the Yupik culture, YK Delta Bethel area. My grandmother was from the Inupiat culture, far north. We're talking kind of north slope and inland down Kotzebue, the Kobuk River is where she was from. Cousins to the Yupik people. They can kind of understand each other, similar. It's in the same language family. There is a shaman tradition there, and one of my favorite shaman legends, and this is reproduced in the artist ivory carvings, are the stories, the old stories of shamans being able to transform themselves into animals. A lot of times they would transform themselves into a polar bear and fight another shaman who's 300 miles over in this village, who also transforms into a giant brown bear, and then their avatars fight like 150 miles in the middle because they're transforming themselves. So, I mean, that's part of Yupik and Inupiaq ancient, the shaman culture of the Angakok. And This story, I believe, has a shaman element because the boy transformed into a hairy man. Obviously, it got the military's attention because they captured it, took it away, and could be studying it to this day if he's still alive. So really weird story of Gabriel Fox, but it's an urban legend in the YK Delta. And that story, I don't know what to think about, but it is very interesting. I am going to be doing some more investigation on the YK Delta because it's just a treasure trove. I visited Bethel 3 times myself, but I haven't been to the smaller villages, which I would like to. But what a story. I'm going to be talking to Patrick some more. I'd like to reach out to the Delta Discovery, but check out some of this for yourself. If you've got any information, email me at chukesoutdoor@outlook.com, and keep tuning in because it's very exciting and I love learning about this stuff. So I really appreciate you all tuning in every Sunday. We're going to talk to Rob Roy Menzies some more. I'm going to be reaching out to Beans Baxter and some of these other guys. I'm just having a ball with this. So thanks, guys. It's Chuke, your friend in the field.